Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, aka the Voice of Reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging.
A gunman killed a sixth grade student and injured 5 other people at a high school in Perry, Iowa earlier today, just as students were arriving back to school after their winter break. 4 of the injured were students and 1 was an administrator. So far, no motive has been released as to the shooting, although we have gotten reports that the shooter took his own life before law enforcement was able to apprehend him. And the news that 3 Israeli hostages were mistakenly shot and killed last month in Gaza by soldiers meant to save them outraged many in Israel, who have since demanded answers about how the army conducts itself on the battlefield and safeguards civilians. American, Israeli, and Lebanese officials insist that few parties want Israel's war in Gaza to become a wider conflict that engulfs the Middle East. But the assassination of a top leader of Hamas in Lebanon on Tuesday and the deaths of scores of people in mysterious twin explosions in Iran on Wednesday threatened to bring the Middle East and the United States closer to the brink of a regional war. Penny Pritzker, a former Obama cabinet official, current Biden appointee, and longtime Democratic mega donor, has rejected calls to step down from her role at the top of Harvard's most powerful governing board. It comes a day after the resignation of university president Claudine Gay. And prominent civil rights activists are slamming Harvard University President Claudine Gay's resignation as an attack on Black leaders, and especially Black female leaders. Gay, who was the first Black woman to lead the Ivy League institution, resigned on Tuesday after weeks under which she was scrutinized for her response to anti-Semitism on campus and plagiarism allegations. Al Sharpton's group, the National Action Network, was outside the office of one of the most outspoken detractors of Claudine Gay, Bill Ackman. According to Al Sharpton, if he, meaning Bill Ackman, doesn't think Black Americans belong in the C-suite, the Ivy League, or any other hallowed halls, we make ourselves at home outside his office. And nearly 3 years after a mob attacked the Capitol on January 6, 2021, in support of former President Donald Trump, the criminal investigation into the events of that day push on. Prosecutors have called the riot inquiry the largest in the history of the Justice Department. As of December, about 1,240 people have been arrested in connection with the attack, accused of crimes ranging from trespassing to seditious conspiracy. And Donald J. Trump's businesses received at least $7.8 million from 20 foreign governments during his presidency. Now, this is according to new documents released by House Democrats today that show how much the former president received from overseas transactions while he was in the White House. Most of it came from China. Now, House Democrats are highlighting these transactions as a counterweight to Republicans' impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden, which has sought to tie him to international business deals by his son, Hunter Biden. This is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. And this is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time. And this is the hour where we go deep, where we dig behind the headlines, and we bring you those stories that people are talking about. And one of the biggest stories that's been in the news almost for the last year has been abortion rights and how states around this country are responding to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Well, today in hour 2, we're going to be talking about a grand jury in Ohio that is considering whether to indict a 34-year-old Black woman who miscarried a non-viable fetus at home. Now, this 34-year-old woman has been charged with, or potentially will be charged if the grand jury comes back with an indictment, she will be charged with abuse of a corpse. a dead body, a person that died. That's this general definition of a corpse. Now, the interpretation, the Ohio prosecutor's interpretation, the potential interpretation by this grand jury that a corpse or that a fetus that doesn't live is a corpse. Extremely, extremely rare interpretation of Ohio state law and any law in the country. And this woman, Brittany Watts, is fighting, literally fighting for her freedom. So in this hour, we're going to talk to a law professor at Case Western University Law School and one of the advocates that was very involved in the push to get abortion rights enshrined into the Constitution of Ohio. And talk to them about what it might mean if Brittany Watts is indicted by this grand jury, has to face a criminal prosecution, and if by some ungodly way she actually finds herself convicted and has to serve jail time. What does that mean for women all over this country who have miscarriages on the regular? Are we all going to be subjected to criminal prosecution, indictment, and even incarceration? Stay with us. Answers to those questions when we come forward right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
We boldly go where no man has gone before.
Boldly taking talk radio where it has never gone before. New vistas, new voices, new views, new visions, new victories. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we're taking public media black.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Follow the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to The Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment contributors in the business as we break down what's going on, who's got next, and what not to miss. Only on The Raw Report with Robin Ayers.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
There's a new sheriff in town.
All right, I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte, and starting September 18th, I couldn't be more thrilled than invite you to join us for the launch of A More Perfect Union. Weekdays right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Weekdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific Time. That's 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. A More Perfect Union promises to deliver national news of consequence, informed opinion, and analysis beyond the headlines. As KBLA Talk 1580's chief national political analyst, every day you can expect your daily dose of political news of consequence. If you're looking to be engaged, enlightened, and empowered to be a part of the solution to issues related to national politics, elections, identity, culture change, and social justice, A More Perfect Union was designed for you. This daily political affairs show will feature notable journalists, industry leaders, lawmakers, change makers, tastemakers, and ordinary people motivated to do their part to reach beyond today's divisions, to make
Brittany Watts, a 34-year-old African-American woman of Warren, Ohio, was arrested in October after passing a fetus in her bathroom and trying to flush the remains down the toilet. The case has been before a Trumbull County grand jury since November. If convicted, Ms. Watts could face up to a year in prison. She has pled not guilty. Now, the grand jury was expected to give its report on Wednesday, but a spokesperson for the county prosecutor said the case has been continued until the next session in a couple of weeks. Now, although records show that Ms. Watts spontaneously miscarried, a finding that the state has not challenged, the case has come under scrutiny by lawyers and reproductive health advocates who say that prosecuting Ms. Watts is baseless and may, and most likely will, deter other women who miscarry from obtaining medical attention they need. Joining us to help us make sense of this really significant case and potential travesty of justice is Jessie Hill. She is a professor of law at Case Western Reserve University and a lawyer who litigates reproductive rights cases. And Morgan Harper returns to the show. She's also an attorney and former candidate for U.S. Senate in Ohio. And Morgan was very involved in a ballot initiative that enshrined abortion rights into the Ohio state constitution. Welcome back, Morgan, and welcome, Professor Hill. I read this story in the New York Times this morning and reached out to both of you. So thank you for being available so quickly. I was so annoyed, so frustrated, so shocked by this story. I had to send it to a couple of friends of mine that live in Ohio to say, what the hell is going on in the state? How can something like this happen, Morgan? Start by telling us, what are the existing laws or the laws at the time that Ms. Watts had her miscarriage? What were the laws around abortion? Because I know from the story that she went to the hospital a couple of times because she was bleeding and she had pain and other complications. So it wasn't like she was just sitting at home hoping her baby or hoping this fetus would miscarry. She was actually actively seeking some kind of medical care.
Yeah, and thanks for having me back on and covering this story, though I'm hopeful for the day where you call me to talk about something in Ohio that is good news and a good reflection of our state, but it'll come. And I'm really happy that Professor Hill is here as well to get into some of the details of the law, because she certainly has a lot more expertise in that area than I do. But I would just say, I think we have a similar perspective if I am interpreting some of her views in interviews that I saw, in that it almost feels like a bit of a red herring to get into this debate about what the state of the law is in Ohio on fetal viability, when the law that she is being prosecuted for potentially having violated is around abuse of a corpse. And so, I agree that I don't even know if we get to that stage of having to even discuss of the viability if we don't agree that there is a corpse here that could have been abused, not to mention any issues around prosecutorial discretion, whether you think, this should be brought at all. That's the first point that I would make, and I think the most important one in this case. The other thing that I would note to just kick things off is I was happy in a way to see that the New York Times was covering this, and or even as you said, that was the story that you saw, because this first came to my attention a few weeks ago, and it was covered by a less esteemed publication, let's say, and without as much detail in the reporting, without sharing some of the journey that Ms. Watts is going through and trying to seek medical care that really reflects a lot of struggles that Black women have in getting proper care, particularly in places like Trumbull County that, in my understanding, don't have a lot of resources for maternal care. And you really came away from that early reporting thinking, oh, this person might have been irresponsible. What was this? Why are you over a toilet with your baby? What's going on? And so it's encouraging to see, the New York Times digging into this a little bit more and providing that context to really demonstrate just how out of bounds it is to use any public resources to try to prosecute this woman and further punish her after a very traumatic miscarriage.
So I'm glad, Morgan, you brought up the point that it might be a red herring to talk about Ohio's abortion laws when she's being charged with abuse of a corpse. So that brings the question, Professor Hill, as to what is a corpse? Because, we all probably have some layperson's definition of a corpse, but in the state of Ohio, when you are charged with abuse of a corpse, how is corpse being defined?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. So I think, it's not a term that is clearly defined in Ohio law, but one thing that seems pretty clear is that by charging Ms. Watts with abuse of a corpse, the state of Ohio is trying to say that this is a baby, this is a person. The common understanding of that word obviously refers to people who have been born, who were alive, and then who died, and not to a fetus that has been miscarried or even, after an abortion. And there are actually separate laws in Ohio that talk about how, fetus and embryos and so on after a miscarriage or after an abortion should be handled. I mean, if this had been a miscarriage that occurred in a hospital, it would not have been treated as a corpse. They would not have gone through the steps that you go through when a person dies in a hospital. And so I think that it's a really just torturing of the law to try to say that it applies to this situation, and also really kind of a sneaky move, if you will, to try to say, notwithstanding everything that just happened in Ohio, we just constitutionalized abortion rights in our Constitution, that this is equivalent to a person who has been born, been alive, and passed away.
So, Professor Hill, you raise a good point that had the multiple, according to New York Times, the multiple times that Ms. Watts went to a hospital, had she been admitted, had she been laying in a hospital bed and had a spontaneous miscarriage in that bed, the hospital personnel would have dealt with the fetus, the embryo, all the things that are emitted from your body when you have a miscarriage. But the fact that she was at her home changes things, now makes her subject to this prosecution. What's different? And I don't know, and maybe you know, Morgan, like if you were at home and have a miscarriage, is it common knowledge? What are you supposed to do?
I don't know. And actually, I didn't know if Professor wanted to answer first with just the meaningful distinction of the hospital versus at home. But yeah, there is no standard procedure. That's what's so ridiculous about this. And I think, just before turning it back to Professor Hill, I would just note in the reporting, we were seeing this, that it wasn't also that she was looking to go home. I mean, it seems like she was waiting because of the uncertainty that had been created in Ohio before we passed this constitutional amendment, this chilling effect in hospitals to provide care in the case of a potential miscarriage, that she's waiting hours for ethics panels at a hospital to decide what care they're able to provide under the law, that then led her to have to keep going back home and considering some of these decisions and all of that. And so it's a real shame. I mean, it's one of the reasons why so many people across the state and country really were trying to get the amendment passed to make sure that we preserve this right, because it's very clear. It just creates so much gray area and puts hospitals and medical professionals in a really tricky position trying to keep up with how some guys in our state house are deciding on what appropriate medical care looks like for women.
So do you know, and I'm still curious, Professor Hill, about this, geographic distinction. I'm at the hospital down the street in a hospital bed versus I go home and I have this spontaneous miscarriage. And now all of a sudden, I'm criminal. Potentially, I'm a criminal. The miscarriage is being criminalized, where if she was laying in a hospital bed, it would not have been. What is the distinction?
I mean, right. Again, the only distinction really is that hospital personnel would probably have more obligations under the law than a person who is miscarrying at home. So, lots of folks have asked me this question, like, what am I supposed to do if this were to happen? And what does the law say? The law doesn't tell people how they have to handle a miscarriage. Nobody is disputing that the fetus was not alive when this happened, when it was delivered, right? And so this is not a question of seeking medical care for a premature baby or anything like this. This was absolutely a miscarriage. There's nothing that could have been done, and there's nothing that Ms. Watts did, as far as I could tell, was a crime at that point. Hospitals have obligations to manage, these things in certain ways to make sure that there is not infection, to make sure it's sanitary and things like that. But if this happens at home, you're not directed to do anything. So I think that's one of the most outrageous things. And actually, as Morgan was just saying, when Ms. Watts presented at the hospital, she was under the 22-week limit that we had in Ohio in effect at the time. And the hospital absolutely could have given her care. They didn't need a reason. They didn't need to determine even whether the fetus still had a heartbeat, or, if it was in the, that she was entitled to be taken care of at that point, but they delayed because of uncertainty and concern and presumably fear.
Let's talk about that, because one big question here, Morgan, is how in the hell did they even know? You're at home in privacy of your own home. You have a miscarriage. Now, we know from this article, she goes to the hospital to have what's called a D&C and to have some further medical procedures done. And the article says the law enforcement goes to her house and takes her toilet out of her home, her apartment, her bathroom. And that's where they find the fetus. So does that mean that when she shows up at the hospital to have the D&C, a medical provider presumably then calls the police? Is that what's happening in Ohio?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what happened. And I do think it connects, like Professor Hill was saying, that, they're trying to cover their bases to make sure they don't have liability and that they were following proper procedures, since now they were providing her with some level of care in connection to this pregnancy to make sure that that was finished, in an appropriate way, I suppose, like the whole course of treatment. But yeah, no, I mean, I think you're exactly right. There are a couple of problematic aspects of this. One, the corpse and whether or not this even fits into the category of being a corpse, given that it was not a viable fetus, there was no birth. And then also, how do you define abuse of a corpse? I mean, is a cremation abuse? We have a lot of discretion to decide how we manage a death or lack of life, or in different contexts as citizens. And it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense why in this one, a woman who has gone through a miscarriage that happens quite often, there is no dictated course of action, that anything she did could be prosecuted as a crime here. And that's where I really get at the why is the prosecutor doing this? It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm really disturbed by the fact that you could show up at a hospital having had a miscarriage, already a traumatic experience, and your doctor or nurse or someone then calls the police on you, and they go to your house, like what, with a search warrant, Professor Hill, and take your toilet out of your bathroom?
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely. It's a travesty that the healthcare provider is a trusted individual, is the person that reported Ms. Watts. There was no obligation, I can say that under Ohio law, to report that to law enforcement. As a matter of fact, that's not even close question that there was no need to report that. And so it was really, again, there may have been confusion. I don't know what the person was thinking, but that it's particularly harmful when trusted individuals do that, and obviously are likely to deter people from seeking care in the future.
Is there any indication by anything you've read, Morgan, because it doesn't say in this article I read, but anything that suggested race played a role in this? She's a 34-year-old Black woman. I don't know what she had on, how she looked. We know Black people are treated differently in our healthcare system. We know that hospitals make assumptions about you when you walk in based on how you dress, how you talk, how you look. Have you read or seen anything to suggest that, had she been a 34-year-old affluent, I don't know where this hospital is, but an affluent Shaker Heights woman walking into a hospital, that perhaps there would not have been a call to law enforcement?
It's a very valid question, because we just don't know. And like the professor was saying, there's no obligation there. And so what was the motivation? I mean, I do think it's a possibility, just the climate. I think it's hard to underestimate just the level of confusion and fear before we were able to pass this amendment by a lot of medical professionals and hospitals with managing their liability. But yeah, also, and like I said, in early reporting, they were definitely presenting Ms. Watts as if she was an irresponsible woman, not properly respecting life and just doing whatever in her home, over this toilet. And I think, it's hard to know whether or not there were some medical professionals involved in this that might have shared a similar perspective as that early reporting was suggesting.
Yeah, one of the things I'm reading in the article, Professor Hill says that one, she had been to this hospital twice. She went home to process some information she was told. This is all coming from a coroner's report. She returned the next day, so this is the second time, the same symptoms, and left a second time without treatment. On September 22nd, she passed the fetus at home alone in her bathroom and returned to the hospital where she received a dilation and curettage, and also called a DNC to remove the placenta. And then the hospital notified the police department about the miscarriage and the need, this is in quotes, to locate the fetus. When we come forward, want to talk about this call by the hospital, and is there anything in Ohio law that would have required them to make a call indicating a need to, quote, locate the fetus? Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Race, culture wars, political turf battles, criminal justice and injustice, the courts. These are the conversations you won't hear elsewhere. My guests are leading journalists, celebrities, and sports figures, elected leaders, and influencers. They aren't afraid to get into it and say the quiet part out loud. With Areva Martin in real time, your commute just became the most engaging part of your day. Tune in weekdays from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. or find us on YouTube. Areva Martin in real time, when you want it straight, no chaser.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the voice of reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the voice of reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Boldly taking talk radio where it has never gone before. New vistas, new voices, new views, new visions, new victories. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we're taking public media black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Follow the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
The bounce is back.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to The Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment contributors in the business as we break down what's going on, who's got next, and what not to miss. Only on The Raw Report with Robin Ayers.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
There's a new sheriff in town.
All right, I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte, and starting September 18th, I couldn't be more thrilled than invite you to join us for the launch of A More Perfect Union. Weekdays right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Weekdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time. That's 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. A More Perfect Union promises to deliver national news of consequence, informed opinion, and analysis beyond the headlines. As KBLA Talk 1580's chief national political analyst, every day you can expect your daily dose of political news of consequence. If you're looking to be engaged, enlightened, and empowered to be a part of the solution to issues related to national politics, elections, identity, culture change, and social justice, A More Perfect Union was designed for you. This daily political affairs show will feature notable journalists, industry leaders, lawmakers, change makers, tastemakers, and ordinary people motivated to do their part to reach beyond today's divisions, to make sense out of news of the day, and offer us all a chance to build a more perfect union. Come on and join me.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Ray Richardson, your sports connection here at KBLA Talk 1580. Join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough every Saturday night at 7 for Out of Bounds, the show that brings some flavor to the world of sports for 60 minutes. We take you beyond the scores and press conferences. We give you our point of view, the way black folks see what's going down. You can join the conversation and give us your analysis at 1-800-920-1580. Out of Bounds every Saturday night at 7 on.
According to a report by the Trumbull County Coroner's Office, Miss Watts was 21 weeks and 5 days pregnant when she was admitted to St. Joseph Warren Hospital in Youngstown, Ohio, with vaginal bleeding on September 19th. Doctors determined that her water broke prematurely and her cervix became dilated. Miss Watts also had a significantly elevated white blood cell count. Doctors were able to detect cardiac activity, but recommended she be induced and deliver the fetus despite its non-viable status. Because she was at significant risk of maternal death, sepsis, or complete placenta abruption with catastrophic bleeding. Now, on her initial visit to the hospital, Ms. Watts left after waiting 8 hours for a hospital ethics panel to determine whether to induce her pregnancy without legal ramifications because she was on the cusp of Ohio's viability timeline, 22 weeks. She went home to process the information she was told. The coroner's office said she returned the next day with the same symptoms and left a second time without treatment. She then passed the fetus at home alone, returned to the hospital. The hospital notified the Warren City Police Department about the miscarriage and the need to locate the fetus. So that's the fact pattern, Professor Hill, that we have here. She's at a hospital. A doctor says she was at significant risk of maternal death, sepsis, or complete placenta abruption with catastrophic bleeding. But yet they would not induce her. Why would they being hospital personnel not induce someone who's literally at risk of dying? And we know what the Black woman maternal mortality rates are. We know delivering a baby in the U.S. for Black women is deadly and so risky.
That's right. I mean, we don't know exactly what the hospital personnel were thinking. You know, it could have been just genuine confusion about what the law means and what the law requires. It could have been, something else about uncertainty about whether they thought it was appropriate or not, hospital policy. But the thing that is really clear in this situation is that the law did not forbid that abortion, or that, because the fetus had a heartbeat at that time, it would have been considered an abortion under Ohio law, but it would have been perfectly legal before 22 weeks for any reason at all. And even if she had reached the 22-week mark, it would have been legal because her health and life were at risk. But I mean, I will just say, I don't think there's a question about that. And at the same time, we have seen lots of instances in Ohio and actually other places across the country where these folks are not necessarily lawyers. They don't necessarily understand the law. They are confused. They are afraid because these laws carry criminal penalties for the doctors and for the hospital folks, that they won't go forward, that they feel like the safer course is just not to do it and to risk harm to the patient, which is really a horrible situation. But to some extent, all of the confusion and all of the incredibly harsh laws are to blame for that, I think.
Yeah, and again, Morgan, there's this really chilling statement. The hospital notified the Warren City Police Department about the miscarriage and the need to locate the fetus. What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is some, well, I mean, we cannot discount, like we were talking about before, that there's some discrimination happening and she was being targeted. But I also think that there's a pretty high probability that they were trying to manage whatever their perceived sense of liability could be, that they had to kind of like bring an end to the situation because they had been involved in her treatment decisions. It does seem like that's possible. But again, I mean, like Professor Hill was saying, we're not in the minds of these medical professionals that are at the hospital. They don't have a legal obligation to notify the police, and why exactly they decided to do that isn't totally clear. But that would be one possibility. And the other thing I would note, it's interesting because I completely agree too that just this chilling effect, the environment it creates, and this ended up being one of the most persuasive points made during this the campaign to protect reproductive freedom in Ohio was having the government, having, the medical professionals can't just treat women regardless of what the situation is, to protect their lives and make sure that they're able to stay healthy. There's images that we are hearing about in other states of women, having to have miscarriages in parking lots of hospitals because the medical professionals don't feel comfortable providing care. I mean, this is what got us to a result of Republicans, independents, and Democrats supporting this constitutional amendment. And in fact, Trumbull County, where this happened, was one of the Trump counties that supported the abortion ballot initiative, where it is leaning more conservatively now. But the people of this county have said, we don't want the government involved in these decisions, and we think that women should be able to manage their own medical decisions.
Yeah, I want to read some more from this article, Professor Hill. It says the police charged Ms. Watts on October 5th with abuse of a corpse as a felony under a law adopted by the Ohio legislature in 1996. The case is being prosecuted by the Warren City's prosecutor's office, the prosecutor is a Democrat. Now, it says the law in question bars the treatment of a human corpse in a way that the person knows would outrage either reasonable family sensibilities resulting in a misdemeanor or community sensibilities resulting in a felony charge. So given that she's being charged with a felony abuse of a corpse, they're saying that her treatment of this corpse is something that outrages community sensibilities. And do you think that's because the corpse is in the toilet? I just don't know what she was to do with this fetus.
Exactly. I mean, you got to kind of wonder, where do people think that miscarriages happen? I mean, this is not an uncommon story, right? And I think, you look at a law like that and how vague that is and how much room there is for manipulation. And you got to realize that that's a law that allows prosecutors and police to decide who they want to criminalize, and to gives them a lot of leeway to, criminalize certain people's choices and not others, or to go after certain situations and not others. And, I just want to note that there has been, these cases do pop up across the country from time to time. This is not the first one like this. These sort of bizarre situations where people are criminalized because of pregnancy outcomes that police or others think are suspicious. And there was even a study by an organization called If, When, How that looked at about 60 of these cases across the country. And they found that disproportionately, it's people of color who are investigated in connection with pregnancy outcomes. Actually, very often, in many cases, it is the healthcare professional that turns them in. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, there is some misuse of the law, where a law that just doesn't really have anything to do with what happened is kind of twisted and contorted and used to prosecute people, even though it's often just an abuse of the law, really. And I think the really just the also horrible thing is, in the end, Ms. Watts may not ever go to trial. The charges may get dismissed. If she does, it may get acquitted. But her life has already been profoundly affected, and she's already suffered profound harm by being treated in this way by the system. And so, all of those things are troubling trends that we have seen in other states.
Yeah, the autopsy report found that the fetus had died in utero before delivery because of complications of premature rupturing of the membranes. Her lawyer says the law in question bars the treatment of a human corpse in a way that the person knows would outrage the community. And she goes on to say, you can't be a corpse if you never took a breath. So, Morgan, how are they? Again, there's no, I guess, clear definition in the state of Ohio of what a corpse is. But if everybody agrees that the fetus died, the fetus is dead, before the delivery, can you be a corpse?
Yeah.
And I guess you have to couple that with your viability. Fetal viability starts in your state at 22 weeks. She's not 22 weeks.
Right. But I don't even think we need to get there to question what is happening here. And another thing that I think is interesting is the judge, and this was again in some of the earlier coverage, there was a video of him also being very confused about the law and just like, oh, this might connect to this constitutional amendment thing, as he was greenlighting this to head to the grand jury. And now he's retired, oddly, right? And so I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't seem like the prosecutor or maybe the judicial branch there in Trumbull County has a clear understanding of the law, unfortunately.
Yeah, the Democratic prosecutor, Dennis Watkins, said his office was duty-bound to follow Ohio law and move forward with the grand jury proceeding. When we come forward, I want to talk about that amendment to the Constitution of the state of Ohio that enshrines abortion rights and how cases like this will move forward in light of that ballot initiative. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the voice of reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the voice of reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
Good stuff, the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.
Boldly taking talk radio where it has never gone before. New vistas, new voices, new views, new visions, new victories. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we're taking public media black.
you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Keep following the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
The bounce is back.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to the Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment contributors in the business as we break down what's going on.
So Jesse Hill, professor of law at Case Western Reserve University and lawyer who litigates reproductive rights cases, and Morgan Harper, attorney and former candidate for U.S. Senate in Ohio, are joining me as we're talking about this very, very upsetting and bizarre case of a 34-year-old Black woman who is facing a felony prosecution if a grand jury decides to indict because she has a miscarriage at home, and hospital staff calls the police on her and then tells the police they've got to go locate this fetus. A lot of bizarre, actions by your trusted medical provider or not so trusted medical provider. But Morgan, in these last couple of minutes, want to talk about what's happening in Ohio, because you were on the show when we talked about how this coalition of voters came together to pass a ballot initiative that did enshrine abortion rights into Ohio's Constitution. Then I remember seeing articles where your Republican state legislature says, we don't care how the voters voted. We are not going to comply. We're not going to comply with this, new amendment to the Ohio Constitution. So what's going on in the state of Ohio now around abortions, particularly given this brazen attitude of Republican lawmakers?
Yeah, so I mean, we did pass the amendment. There were attempts to try to see if they could stall that or try to roll back some of it, but it is the law of the land in Ohio that we have the ability to make our own reproductive health decisions, including in the cases of miscarriage. There is still the ability through the amendment to prohibit activity after fetal viability, but that's determined on a case-by-case basis. And if there's any potential harm or death to the mother, then then that would not be as relevant. And so that's good. That's the good news. But the journey certainly continues for us because, like you said, I mean, the state legislature is not really trying to make Ohio a place where rights are protected and freedom is protected. We just saw that the governor had to veto an attempt to limit trans people from getting gender, affirming care, and that is something the state legislature has said that they want to try to override, and they have a supermajority, so they've come back early from break to do that. And so it's the fight continues. It's still quite treacherous right now, I would say, from a civil rights and civil liberties perspective here in the state of Ohio, and a lot of the coalition that enshrined the right to abortion is continuing to do work to protect all of our rights across the board.
So, Professor Hill, I know you litigate reproductive rights cases. What are courts in Ohio? And I presume that, there may be a majority, correct me if I'm wrong, of conservatives that are on your courts, given who's been the governor of the state for the last, decade or so. How are courts going to interpret cases brought where women are trying to enforce their reproductive rights, given the hostility towards the amendment by the legislature?
Well, that's the big question right now, and it's a really important one. So you're correct. Our Ohio Supreme Court has 7 justices on it, and 4 of those are Republicans who are, very anti-abortion. Actually, campaigned in their elections against abortion. Our judges are all elected at the state level in Ohio. So. And in fact, there is a hugely important election coming up in November 2024, not just for our country, but also for our Ohio Supreme Court, because there is a possibility, there are 3 seats that are up, 2 are held by Democrats, 1 by a Republican. And so there is a possibility to flip that majority right now in Ohio. And I think, people may or may not realize this, but ultimately, all of the questions under the new amendment that were passed, all of the interpretation, any cases that arise are going to end up before that Ohio Supreme Court. And Ohioans really have to decide, do they want justices who campaigned against abortion, who said they don't think abortion is a constitutional right, sitting on those cases or not? So it's a big moment right now and very, very important question.
And what leeway will these Republican justices who've made it very clear that women should not have the rights that have been voted on by the Ohio, the citizens of the state of Ohio, what rights might these judges have? Can they determine that amendment is unconstitutional and determine it null and void? Is that likely to be the kind of case that we see brought up to the Ohio Supreme Court in the same way we saw the case that was brought before the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Right. Well, right now, actually, just today, some legislators in Ohio introduced a law that would say that actually the courts don't have any jurisdiction over this new amendment at all, and only the legislature does, because they're afraid there might be some courts that actually interpret the law the way it was written and the amendment the way it was meant to be applied. And even the way the Ohio, which has a Republican attorney general, said, all bans and most restrictions on abortion currently in Ohio would be unconstitutional under this new law, as many, many people acknowledge. So they're just trying to take it away from the courts completely. Now, that in and of itself is probably an unconstitutional move. The legislature doesn't just get to do that. But yeah, I think there could be questions on the borderline where a court that was really hostile to abortion rights might be inclined to not take the amendment at face value and not read it for everything that it's meant to do.
What are you seeing, Morgan, on the grounds? I mean, this case, obviously, hopefully it's an aberration. Hopefully the hospital involved in this case is not operating like this on a regular. Hopefully this isn't standard operating procedures where women come into the hospitals and they call the police. I mean, I'm just so appalled by the conduct of these medical professionals. And I do want to say we've seen a lot of doctors on the front lines, working with and building coalitions with abortion rights activists. So many doctors are just as disgusted by the position that they're put in by some of these restrictive abortion laws. But what are you hearing on the grounds? Well, now that the amendment is passed, is this going to happen again? Are doctors still themselves going to be, on the hunt to report women who might fall in that 20 week time period? Or do you think doctors now feel energized and feel liberated? Hey, we have this amendment to the Constitution. Now we don't have to call the police on our patients.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's tough to totally relax here at the moment. And I think there's a real feeling that we have to continue to be vigilant and, take, for example, with the Supreme Court races that Professor Hill was mentioning, those are usually fairly sleepy races. They don't get a lot of attention. I don't think if you ask people, is there a Supreme Court in Ohio? I'm not sure most people would even know that the answer is yes, right?
Definitely not who sits on it. Nobody would probably know that.
And would not be able to name a justice for sure. But that is likely to change in this environment. We saw unprecedented levels of participation and turnout. And so there is a strong possibility, given the level of scrutiny right now around some of these decisions and the way discretion is used and the effort that it took to protect our rights here, that we hope will transfer over into some of these races. And like I was referencing earlier, you know, it's not just reproductive rights. There is a larger assault here in the state of Ohio on freedom on all fronts, and that this is going to be a state that is welcome to everyone. And that's something that people are very aware of, that we're fighting for the future of our home, that it's going to continue to be a place that we all are able to live and be ourselves.
Real quickly, Professor Hill, if you are a woman, particularly a woman of color, and you are experiencing problems with a pregnancy, you think you're having a miscarriage, should you go to a hospital, period?
No. Well, I'm not a doctor. I think probably the answer is yes, because after all, folks need medical care. And I do think that most health professionals are really trying to help people and trying to do the right thing in most cases, but it's really scary to say that you don't always know that that's going to be the case.
Thank you so much. We are out of time. Appreciate all the work that both of you, Professor Hill and Morgan, that you are doing on this issue. Such an important issue. Obviously not the last case that we're going to see of this kind, but hopefully folks start to realize how important these races are. As you said, Morgan, these down ballot races, these local races, these judicial races, all very, very important in this election season. Next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers and the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Don't touch that dial. Thank you.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences?